While EV sales are cooling in some markets around the world, primarily the US and China, new EV sales in other parts of the world are continuing on the rise. But even in the US, where new sales are falling, primarily thanks to the elimination of the US federal tax credit under President Donald Trump, 2026 is shaping up to be a good year for those wanting to get behind the wheel of a new-to-them used EV. Why? Well, that's pretty simple. This year, more people will reach the end of their EV lease period and be faced with one of two choices: hand their car back and get into another vehicle, or buy their lease out, usually via a crippling balloon payment. Because of how lease agreements are usually structured, and in an age where inflation is still generally on the rise, it makes less sense to buy out the lease than it does to just hand your vehicle back, even if you're particularly attached to your EV. And that, in turn, means a bunch of used EVs, often lower mileage in order to meet those lease terms, are going to be entering onto the used car marketplace. And for folks who want a used car, that's fantastic news. As with any marketplace, whatever's being sold, the more of something there is, the lower the asking price of said thing or things become. So an injection of just off-lease cars into the used car marketplace will not only lower the average asking price of used EVs, but also increase the choice for those looking to get behind the wheel. And while used EVs do come with a whole host of positives, not least of which being the fact that someone else ate up the worst of the car's depreciation for you, there are a bunch of concerns that come with used EVs that might be putting you off making the decision. So today I'm going to try and address some of them in regards to off-lease EVs. Before we get too far into the weeds, some common sense stuff. Obviously, I am not a financial expert, and buying a new-to-you car is expensive, even if it is ultimately used. Do your own sums when it comes to affordability, and treat this video as a set of checkpoints or starting points for your own journey, rather than a how-to, or God forbid, do it this way. As I mentioned in my intro, this year is shaping up to be a record one for off-lease EVs hitting the used car marketplace, and to understand why, we need to do a bit of time travelling and go back to 2022 and 2023. That's when most of these leases were originally signed, and in both the US and Europe, which together account for roughly a third of global car sales, governments at the time were actively dangling incentives in front of people's eyes to get them into EVs. The specifics varied by market. In the US, it was the federal tax credit worth up to $7,500 that could be passed directly to leasees through lower payments. Across Europe, it was a patchwork of national purchase subsidies, company car tax breaks, and in some places, CO2-linked fleet regulations that made going electric the financially obvious choice for corporate buyers. And in both cases, the result was the same. Leasing became dramatically more attractive than buying. In the US, EV lease rates climbed from around 14% of new EV transactions in 2022 to nearly 47% by 2023, and continued going up from there. In Europe, the numbers were even more striking. Around 60% of new cars are leased overall, and EVs specifically saw that figure to be estimated at closer to 80%, with corporate fleets and commercial car buyers accounting for around 60% of new EV purchases across 16 major European markets at the time, that included Germany, Britain, France, and Spain. In the US alone, that surge added up to nearly 1 million EV leases getting signed between early 2022 and March of last year. Across Europe, the numbers are proportionally similar. So what happens now that those 2- and 3-year leases are coming to a close? Well, in the US market alone, more than 300,000 used EVs are expected to be off lease this year, an increase of over 200% compared to 2025. And because most leases run 2 to 3 to maybe 4 years, the bulk of what's coming back are 2022 through 2024 models with around 25,000 miles on the clock, recent enough to still carry substantial factory and battery warranty coverage. Multiply that picture across Europe and other markets where leasing was similarly popular at the time, and it starts to be really obvious what the scale of what's heading into the used car market right now is gonna look like. And that is great for people who want to buy a used EV, but as is always the case, there are some things you should bear in mind before making any purchase decisions, and some questions that should be very much raised and answered through research before you actually sign on the dotted line. For many years, the spectre of leased vehicles had some kind of mixed connotations in the used car market. While it can be a great way of getting behind the wheel of a new-to-you car that's lower in price, there's a whole host of concerns about how well the car was treated by its previous driver because, well, they didn't own it. And in some people's minds, leased cars are one step down the risk pyramid from rental cars, which, as we all know, are always off-road capable and spend their entire working lives being driven hard. But today I will do my best to assuage some of those concerns as we go. First things first, let's remind ourselves of a typical lease structure. Many of you will have leased a car at some point, but not everyone has, so it's worth touching base on what a modern lease agreement actually expects of you. I've leased twice myself. On the first occasion, I paid through the nose in mileage overage charges and return niggles, which is exactly why the second time around actually bought the lease out after 18 months of my ownership with a used car loan. But more on that a little later. Most automotive leases, certainly the ones covering EVs that are about to come to term, set a cap on how many miles or kilometres your vehicle can travel every year. The lower the mileage you agree to, the cheaper your monthly payment becomes, because a lower odometer reading means a more valuable car on the used marketplace. Leases will also typically require regular servicing at an approved dealer and routine maintenance carried out on a schedule to protect said car's residual value. Go over mileage and you will pay through the nose for the privilege. Any modifications or damages, well, they need to be rectified before you hand the keys back, or again, huge fees. And this is important. That fee isn't necessarily there to fix the car. More often than not, it's to compensate the leasing company for the lower resale value that the damage or modification has caused. I want you to remember that fact because it's going to matter later in the video. Because most lease agreements require regular servicing at an approved dealership, many, though not all EVs coming off lease today should arrive with a comprehensive service record. For a used car buyer, that is significant reassurance when it comes to EV battery health and warranty status. And while I'm talking about that, if the vehicle has covered less mileage than its lease agreement anticipated, well, that's a good sign. It's a meaningful chance that you're going to have more battery warranty than you might otherwise have. Most manufacturers offer battery and drivetrain warranties of around 8 years or more, depending on where you are in the world, and battery warranties are generally transferable to subsequent owners, though it's always worth verifying this for the specific make and model you're looking at because the details do matter and there are some significant gotchas. As an example, let's look at Hyundai and Kia. These two companies have a headline 10-year powertrain warranty, but it drops to 5 years when the vehicle changes hands, though crucially, the EV battery warranty does remain fully transferable. And there are also some other outliers worth knowing about. For example, GMC voided bumper-to-bumper coverage entirely on 2023 and 2024 Hummer EVs if ownership was transferred within the first 6 months of delivery, which frankly is an unusual policy decision, but it was designed to discourage people flipping the car. but it also catches out unsuspecting buyers. And when I say flipping, I don't mean turning it over, I mean trying to sell it on quickly for a profit. So while you are likely going to have a substantial battery and drivetrain warranty still remaining on any off-lease EV, the broader non-battery warranty picture is one that you need to pay much more attention to, because lease terms are specifically designed to end just about the same point that standard bumper-to-bumper coverage expires, which is typically somewhere between 3 and 5 years, depending on where you live and the make and model of your vehicle. Frankly, it's not a coincidence. So even if your off-lease EV comes back under its odometer reading in terms of lease estimates, its general warranty may be right at or just past its expiry date. Again, you should always check, don't assume, and don't necessarily listen to what the dealer tells you. Do your own research online. Also, and this is where it gets really nasty, catching unsuspecting used car market buyers is the way in which automakers are increasingly fudging the whole connected vehicle thing. And for that, I do need to take a bit of a detour, although it's worth noting this applies to many ICE vehicles as well as EVs these days. So my very first EV was a 1998 Mini L. And it was about as smart as a brick. It came with 3 12-volt lead-acid batteries, a pretty rudimentary DC motor, and a controller that had more in common with the ones being used on the local golf course than anything you'd find in a modern EV today. It had no smart connectivity, it had no radio. I had to fit one myself. It didn't even have a battery management system until I converted it to lithium-ion and installed one. Those were the days. To get the very heavy onboard transformer-based charger to play nicely with our lithium-ion set, I had to wire a relay from the BMS to the charger so that when the highest cell voltage hit its set limit, the charger just cut out. It was the height of sophistication for 2006. And remote monitoring meant plugging in a 20-foot serial cable into the BMS when the car was home, which I then connected to an old iMac I'd set up in the garage. It was awesome. Modern EVs are a different world entirely. They all come with some form of telematics and over-the-air software update functionality, and honestly, it's one of the genuinely great things about owning an EV today. You can pull up, plug in, walk away, and have real-time battery state of charge data sent straight to your phone. Or if you're a proper nerd like me, piped directly into your home automation system. Yeah, I have a little thing by my front door that says how full my cars are. I'm sad. You can gain new features without ever visiting a dealer through these systems, and you also pay for the privilege of things like unlocking additional subscription features, which can be everything from online mapping and remote route planning through to more advanced telematics, semi-autonomous driver assistance systems like Blue Cruise, Super Cruise, and Tesla's full self-driving, and famously, heated seats. Yes, BMW, I'm looking at you. And here's where it gets important for used car buyers, because while a private seller might technically never tell the manufacturer they've sold the car, meaning that features paid for a lifetime basis of the car could mysteriously migrate their way to you, that ain't gonna happen if you've got an off-lease EV returning back to the dealership. It's actually quite a big earner for automakers. The off-lease car gets returned to the dealer, it goes to the dealer network and the manufacturer's computer systems, everything gets updated, and you can bet a sizable sum of cash that all of those fancy subscription features that somebody else paid for will be reset as if the vehicle were brand new. Tesla is the most aggressive example of this. For example, as of early 2026, full self-driving is no longer sold as a one-time purchase. It's a subscription-only service at $99 a month, and when Tesla takes a trade-in, FSD is stripped from the car before the vehicle is then resold, or with a new subscription. Even if the car was purchased brand new with FSD for life. And BMW made headlines not so long ago for attempting to charge monthly fees to people for heated seats, hardware already physically installed in the car, before there was a massive consumer backlash which forced it to abandon that particular scheme. But the broader principle hasn't actually gone away. Ford's Blue Cruise and GM's Super Cruise don't follow the car to a new owner without a fresh, new, often more expensive subscription. Which means that the bottom line is, before you buy any used connected vehicle, EV or otherwise, you should check exactly which features are active, which are subscription gated, and whether any of them will survive the change of ownership. Because usually they won't. For example, some EVs left the factory 3 years ago with 3 years of access and sometimes even lifetime access for certain features activated as standard. And while Monroney stickers, the things that most people call window stickers that tell you what the car had when it left the factory, they might be great at telling you what hardware the car had, they can also leave you with the impression that a feature or features were activated as standard when in fact they're now being treated as subscription only. More on off-lease EVs in a moment, but first, did you know that we are here because of our amazing community of supporters on Patreon, YouTube, Discord, Fluxer, and Ko-fi? Unlike a lot of channels, we don't take big advertorial sponsorship deals, and we only exist because you support us. There is a link down below on how to join, plus links on our channel in the Fediverse, because in addition to being fully independent, we also think everyone should have free access to all the cool information. All of that out of the way, let's get to the actual business of finding off-lease vehicles, because there are actually several different ways you might come across one, and they're not all the same. The first, and perhaps less common than you might expect way, is that an off-lease vehicle gets returned to the dealership that originally initiated the lease, cleaned up, and then put straight on the used car lot. I'll get to the other routes in a moment, but this one is worth understanding first. The advantage here is continuity. Very often, that car was also serviced by the same dealership throughout its lease life, so you get an unbroken chain of ownership and service records in just one place. And that is genuinely valuable and can avoid a lot of headaches. But don't assume that continuity means the car has been thoroughly prepared for resale. In most cases, it just won't be. A cursory inspection, maybe a quick pass through a service bay, and that's about it for most of them. I have actually seen cars go from lease return to someone else's hands in as little as 24 hours, though that is very much the exception rather than the rule. More typically, there's quite a while between them, because until the paperwork from the lease return is properly completed and the finance company is satisfied, the car can't legally be sold on. The leasing company has to formally release the asset first, and that process moves at its own pace, regardless of how keen the dealership is to shift the car on. And for this reason, the more common path for an off-lease EV in most markets looks very different. Rather than going straight back onto the dealer lot, leased cars are handed back to the leasing company via a dedicated agent, transported to a holding facility and then an auction house, and then sold off in bulk. Sometimes individuals can register and bid on individual vehicles as private customers, but more often than not, you need to be a registered business entity to participate. The practical upshot is that most off-lease vehicles, EVs included, are acquired by used car dealerships at wholesale auction prices and end up on used car lots. And look, I don't want to sound like the commonly used name for a female dog here, but most mainstream new car dealerships are not exactly renowned for their EV knowledge. Used car dealerships are, frankly, worse, with some honourable exceptions. The occasional lot with someone on staff who genuinely knows their stuff and actually wants to help. Most know considerably less about EVs than they would like to admit. If they think they can buy it cheap and sell it on for more, they'll give it a go, which is, I can only assume, how a used car dealership in Vancouver, Washington ended up with a first-generation Toyota Mirai sitting on its lot for months on end. For those who don't live in the Pacific Northwest, I want to let you know that the nearest hydrogen filling station to Vancouver, Washington is in Vancouver, BC, Canada. Or California, both of which are so far away from Vancouver, Washington, you would need a dedicated trailer to take your Mirai north or south every time you needed to fill up. For that reason, and so many others I simply don't have time to get into right now, it really is worth seeking out specialist used EV dealerships when looking to buy your next car. As I've mentioned more than once, joining a local EV owners group or association is a great starting point because their members will know which specialist dealers in your area are worth your time and which ones aren't. Personally, I've bought 2 EVs from Platt Auto here in Portland, Oregon. They are a used EV specialist and they know their stuff. Battery health, recalls, the works. Everyone who works there drives an EV. And no, this isn't just a sponsored segment. I genuinely had a great experience there and I want to say so. But wherever you end up buying, whether it's just a used car lot or a used EV specialist, you should always ask for an official battery health check. A specialist EV dealer will sort that out without even blinking. A mainstream used car lot is more likely to look at you blankly or tell you they can't help. But the good news here is that there are now solid independent services that can fill that gap. Generational in the UK, Recurrent in the US, and Avilu, which operates across Europe, Australia and beyond, all offer some kind of service, usually to the dealers, to make sure that used EVs are healthy. There are others too, and the market is growing fast. And a battery health certificate from any of these services is genuinely worth the modest cost to get it, and in the used EV market, a seller who refuses to facilitate one should be one that you run a long way from quickly. I'm not going to go into the full used car purchase process here and what to look out for because I've made several videos on that in the past and I'll link to them in the description. But there are a couple of things that I do want to cover before we wrap up, and the first is the matter of extended warranties. The honest answer is that the value of an extended warranty depends entirely on the warranty company and, unfortunately, the very, very small print. Before you sign anything or put down so much as a deposit, you should insist on reading that contract in full. And that's not me being dramatic or boring. That's just common sense. At a broad level, I want to make sure you understand that most mainstream extended warranties specifically do not cover EV battery packs. Powertrain coverage does vary. Some policies include it and some don't. But the battery is one component that is most frequently excluded, and it also happens to be the most expensive thing in an EV to replace. There are dedicated EV extended warranty products out there that do cover the battery and full powertrain, but they tend to be less common and quite a bit more expensive than a standard policy, and they may only cover certain makes and models. That said, don't write off standard extended warranties entirely. Here at Transport Evolved, our videographer Vi has made exceptional use of the extended warranty they purchased with their used 2019 Chevrolet Bolt EV. It's just coming up to its expiry point, but over the past 4-ish years, it's covered multiple suspension and axle-related issues, and the total payouts came about to what was originally paid for it in the first place. Sure, you could have that money sitting in a savings account instead, but at that point, it's really about peace of mind. It's better to have a known monthly cost or one-off cost than a surprise bill that wipes out all of your savings in one go. Speaking of warranties, and this is something I don't see discussed nearly enough by the industry, before you commit to buying any off-lease EV, you need to check that the manufacturer warranty is still actually in force. Not just that it technically should be based on the age and mileage, but that it actually is by asking the manufacturer directly. Because even in a regularly serviced leased vehicle, you can have warranty voiding, and the reasons aren't always obvious. In the US, buyers have the protection of the Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act, which places the burden of proof on the automaker to demonstrate that a fault was caused by your actions or modifications before they can actually deny a claim. The US has an advantage. How many times have we not been able to say that lately? Other markets have their own consumer protection equivalents to the US's laws, the EU Sale of Goods Directive, for example, the UK Consumer Rights Act. There are many more. But the strength of these protections does vary, and the small print can still screw you over. The Smart for 2 electric drive is one of the more eye-opening examples of that. Its battery pack contains a desiccant cartridge, which is basically a large silica gel pack designed to keep moisture out of the battery casing because moisture plus batteries not so good. And that cartridge must be replaced on a strict schedule every 2 years on older models and every 4 on newer ones. If you don't do it, and it's not marked on the service record as having been done, or you happen to use an aftermarket part rather than one of the genuine Mercedes components, or you fail to have the replacement logged correctly at an authorised dealer, Mercedes-Benz will quite happily void your battery warranty. It is also worth noting that the battery packs in both the Smart for 2 ED and the Mercedes B-Class Electric were actually built by Tesla, and no Tesla vehicle has ever required anything like this. So, yeah, make of that what you will. Before buying any used off-lease EV, be sure to read the battery warranty small print. Check which maintenance things are required during the lease period, confirm that they were carried out correctly and logged, and make sure nothing you're planning to do, modifications, third-party servicing, charging habits, creates any grounds for a future denial, because lawyers, in addition to being paid a lot of money, are very good at finding loopholes, and every automaker, pretty much like every other multinational company around the world, are known for not giving money back willingly. Earlier, I mentioned that I'd bought out my own lease, and in that case there was a very specific reason for it, so I decided that it might be good for me to share here. My car was so far over its agreed annual mileage that overage charges alone at the point of return would have cost me more money than simply paying out the remaining finance and keeping the car. It wasn't a conventional path, but it does happen, and I actually saved money by doing it. When leaseholders do buy out their lease, one of a few things typically follows. They keep the car and eventually sell it on privately, in which case at that point it's like any other used car sale, or occasionally buy it out specifically to sell it on at a profit. That second scenario is rare, but if the original lease deal was particularly favourable or market conditions swing heavily enough in the seller's favour, you may occasionally come across it. What might make that happen? Well, fuel prices hitting painful levels do tend to focus minds, and I will just leave that thought there, given what's going on in the world right now. As for me, I bought my lease out because I liked the car, had already modified it, and knew exactly how it had been looked after. I also faced very expensive charges if I handed it back with the odometer that far over its agreed limit, which, if you think about it, is actually the best possible argument for buying out a lease, just not especially relevant advice for a video about buying somebody else's off-lease EV. The only other specific tips I have for off-lease used EVs, well, if you're interested in any kind of subscription features, to reach out to the manufacturer in question, because sometimes, just sometimes, if you pretend like you don't know what's going on and you speak to the automaker's telematics sales team, you might just be able to negotiate the same kind of deals that were offered when the vehicle was brand new. I know that I was able to do that when we purchased my wife's Bolt EV off-lease as a second-hand vehicle, but that was in, 2021, and I don't expect the same trick would work today, 9 years after our current Bolt was made. This year could be the very best year so far to go all-electric with a fresh off-lease EV, and it could help you save a lot of money if you have access to home charging. But if you're at this point in the video and you're still not sure about the basics of EV ownership or what to look out for when buying a used EV, of any age in fact, go check out the videos I'll link to in the show notes, which you can find in this video's description or on our website at transportevolved.com. In the meantime, do your research, check the fine print, and happy off-lease EV hunting. Thanks for watching to the end. If you made it this far, let me know in the down below if you've ever considered an off-lease EV. And if you have, did you end up buying a used EV that was freshly off-lease or not? What were your experiences like, and what advice would you give to everyone here? We're 100% independent, and if you'd like to help us stay that way, there's a link in our show notes to support us on Patreon from $1.50 a month, so you can join the long list of amazing channel supporters right here. You can also send us money on Ko-fi, buy some swag from our swag store, like this phenomenal, very timely t-shirt, and please hit subscribe. YouTube won't reliably tell you that we've pushed a new video because it's all about the AI and nothing else. So while subscribing does help, make sure you also follow us on social media. You can join our Discord chat room, or in fact, you can join us on Fluxer. Links below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for helping be the positive change in the world. And until next time, keep evolving.